It's Create Day. So I'm going to start this project by making my air dry clay Christmas light bulbs. I'm using this mold I got from Michael's. It's actually a candy mold, so it's not ideal for clay because it's a lot flimsier than the regular clay molds. So I did get some little indentations on the front of my bulbs from my fingers trying to press down on this to get them out. But for the most part, it worked pretty well. And I just smoothed down the edges and then set them aside to dry. Once they were dry, I used gesso to give them all a good primer coat. You don't have to do a primer with the air dry clay, but for the painting technique I wanted to do on these, I thought it would be best. The colors I'm using for my bulbs are Santa Red, Bright Yellow, Bright Blue, Festive Green, and Orange. For this first coat, I'm using a technique that I saw a painter use when she was painting on canvas, and I watered down this first coat just to make it a little more translucent. We want that center to be lighter than the outer edges when we're done. So all of these I'm doing with a watered down first coat. So now I wanted to make some air dry clay snowflakes. I had this mold that has some really small snowflakes on it. I tried them all, but there was only two that I could get them to turn out. So I just made it's the largest one, and then one of the smaller ones seemed to come out the best. So that's what I went with. So now we're doing the second coat on these bulbs, and I'm going around the edges and the top and the bottom with just the paint, not watered down this time, so that all of that is darker, leaving that lighter halo in the middle of the bulb. I'm trying to mimic a technique that I saw an artist do when she was painting on canvas, and I don't recall her name right now. If I remember or if I can look it up again, I will drop that in the description box. She does beautiful work. I was just amazed at how good her painting looked. So I thought I'd try it on these, even though they are, three-dimensional. I thought, well, maybe I can achieve a similar look. Time to start our birchwood snowman. These are the birchwood slices that you can get in a bag at Hobby Lobby. And I just picked two out that I thought would be the right size for the head and for the body of the snowman. And I'm applying slightly watered down acrylic white paint. I still want the wood to show through. Now with some chalk paste and a stencil, I want to get a texture for the background of this board. So I tape my stencil on and I just spread this chalk paste all around, filling it all in but not overdoing it, trying to get it pretty flat on the top of the stencil. Then I can peel that up, kind of wipe down those edges a little bit, and let it dry before I go on to the next section. Once that's dry, I move on to the next section and just repeat the process until the entire board is covered. Now in my bulbs, I wanted just a little bit more color in that center, so I went back with some more of the paint, watered down, but just maybe not quite as much. Just trying to give that a little more uniform color than what it had. Now I'm going to add some arms to my snowman. So I just have a twig, like a real twig that I got out of the yard, and I just figure out where I want his arms and drill a small hole, and then I can push those in there with some glue and he'll have his arms. And here's where I'm just applying those arms with some tacky glue. I'm using a dark green called Campground to paint the light socket portion of my light bulbs. And for the string that will be holding these all together, fortunately I had some string that was already green, but I'm going to go ahead and just coat that with the same color, Campground, so that it matches the little light sockets. Now with my white acrylic paint, I'm just going to add some little highlights onto these bulbs. To make my snowman's hat, I'm just using this thin foam sheet that I got from Hobby Lobby, I think. I'm not sure. And I just cut a strip out. I'm not sure what size I need, so I just make sure it's big enough so that I have plenty to work with. And I just wrap it around and see how much I need, and then trim it off when I figure out how tall I want it to be. Then once I have it the size I need, I just go ahead and glue it together with some hot glue. This paint bottle was the perfect size for the brim of my hat, so I just used it to trace a circle and cut that out. Then I traced that middle section around so that I can cut that out and it will be the top of the hat. Now I'm tracing around the inside of the hat onto the brim so that I can cut that out and it will fit over the snowman's head. And then I'm able to just go ahead and assemble the hat with my hot glue. So here I'm realizing that the brim of my hat is too small because I need to manipulate this so that it can go over his head but still be open in the back because he's going to be attached onto the board. And because of that, it just kept tweaking it so it looked more like a cowboy hat. It just wasn't big enough. So I went ahead and trimmed off the excess around the main part of the hat. And then I had to go in and make a bigger brim. So I traced around and then I just made a bigger circle so I knew where I had to cut out. And I just had to do the same process all over again with cutting out that middle piece and manipulating it so that it would fit around his head. So it worked much better this time, so I was able to go ahead and attach that with my hot glue. So then I just trimmed the back, making it as flush as I could, and seeing how he was going to fit on here. So now you can see why I needed the back of the hat to be as flat as possible. So once that was all good to go, I went ahead and just kind of sanded around to clean up the edges of the hat a little bit. Then it was time for a coat of black acrylic paint. With my texture all dry on my board, I went over with some fine grit sandpaper just to kind of smooth out any bumps and get everything all nice and even. Then it was time for some white acrylic paint. Now back to the bulbs. Some of the white highlights I did were just a little too stark. So I'm going back in with some more watered down paint to tone that down just a little bit. Once they were dry, it was time for some triple thick glossy finish on just the bulb part, not the light socket. Now I'm just using some baker's twine to add some color to my snowman's hat. So I am using hot glue to attach this. I will go around the base of the hat twice with the twine, and then I will cover up that top seam with this twine, just wrapping it around one time at the top. Now I am hot gluing on his carrot nose, which is just the tip of a skewer that I painted orange. And then I'm adding his buttons to his body. They're just little basic black buttons. So now I am just penciling in a basic snowman face. I'm not good at freehand, so I kept this as simple as I could. And then I just go in with my black paint pen and fill in the dots. Okay, so I wanted to do a stencil on this, let it snow, but because of this textured surface, I knew that I would get a lot of bleed through, so I thought I would share with you what I did because I did it off camera. I was just experimenting, but it turned out. So there's my stencil onto this paper, and it's bakery tissue. It is like a good combination of tissue paper and wax paper. So you have one side that doesn't have the wax on it, and that's the side you want to stencil on. And because it does have the wax on the other side, it is a little more sturdy than tissue paper. However, it's still pretty, transparent. So it should decoupage nicely onto this. So I had just taped this down with my painter's tape. And for this one, I went with this periwinkle color. And originally, I tried a brush, and it didn't work well. It tore the tissue paper. So then I went in with this makeup sponge, and that worked out a lot nicer. So I just wanted to let you know about this bakery tissue in case you're doing projects where you want to stencil but you have a textured surface. This is an option. So now I have all my pieces on here so that I can figure out where I want to decoupage this stenciled bakery paper on to my board. So then I remove everything and just take my Mod Podge and do the top half of the stencil and smooth it out. And I'm using this little rubber scraper thingy to get any air bubbles out, and then I can lift up the bottom portion and then Mod Podge that down as well. With it all smoothed out, I can go around the edges with more of the Mod Podge. And I have to say, this worked really well. You cannot see that paper on this board. Like, it just looks like you either hand drew that on there or somehow stenciled it on there. It is a really great option for stenciling. And now I'm just giving the snowflakes a coat of white acrylic paint. For my snowman scarf, I just have this scarf that I thrifted, and I'm cutting off one little section of the end, and then I will figure out how he's going to be arranged with this, how I'm going to drape it around, just so I know how much of this length that I need. Then I trim off the excess and then make little fringes on the end by just making small cuts. Now it's time to attach our light bulbs, and I'm using the Turbo Tacky Glue for this. A lot of times I use the Gorilla Wood Glue as well, but usually I use that when the clay is still wet and this is dry. So the tacky glue will hold just fine for this. And I start with the center bulb and then, kind of roughly measure and see if I've got it centered. And then from there, I start with the outer bulbs and then work my way in towards the center bulb. It's just easier for me to do it that way. I feel like I can get a better result of making sure that everything is spaced properly. Then I apply my snowflakes with some Turbo Tacky Glue. I'm going to use espresso bean brown acrylic paint to paint over some of there's a lot of sparklies on this. It's actually like bowl filler that I got from Michael's, and I'm using it as a tree next to my snowman, but I didn't want quite so much bling on it, so I'm going to use a couple different colors of paint to make this look more like a natural tree. And the next color I'm using is called Cinnamon. And I'm leaving the little ice cube looking blocks that are on this. I like those. I just didn't want all those things that look like sequins on there. Next color is just medium brown. Then I want to do some highlighting with the color Linen. And here's a before and after. The one on the right is how it started out, and the one on the left is after the paint. Alright, so now it's time to assemble our snowman. I'm going to start with the placement of his scarf. I'll just be gluing that down with hot glue. And then I can place his body where I want it to be, and I will attach that with Gorilla Wood glue and a little bit of hot glue for the instant hold. Then I'm able to figure out his scarf placement and glue that down with hot glue as well. Now it's time to add our tree, and I just attach that with hot glue. I painted the edge and the top handle piece of this board in black, and for some reason I don't have the footage of that. I don't know if I didn't hit record or if I'm just lost it somehow. But now what I'm showing is I'm going over that with the white acrylic paint to give it a more distressed look. I ended up doing some more of the snowflakes to put on this other side around the tree with the snowman, and I'm gluing them down with my Gorilla Glue, and then I will add the paint to them once they're glued on. It's time to attach our little green cord to the light bulbs. I made a knot that I want to attach onto the top of the light socket, and I want to do that on each of them. So I try to figure out where I want that next knot to be, and I thought, well, I'll just mark it with my little paint marker, and that's where I tie the knot, but it did not work out that way. It ended up being too short. So I just, in the end, I had to undo this knot and start over, but then I just eyeballed it from there, and that worked out just fine. So once I had all the knots tied, I went ahead and then attached those to the top of the light sockets with my hot glue. Then I just wrapped the remainder of the string down along the edge, hot glued it into place, and trimmed off the excess. I had a couple of spots that weren't laying down just the way I wanted it to, so I just attached that to the board with some hot glue. So now I want to make a snowy texture, and I'm mixing baking powder with some white acrylic paint. This makes a fluffier texture than if you use baking soda. So I get a nice thick mixture going, and then I can paint that onto the snowman's hat and onto some of the light bulbs, the tree, just wherever I wanted to add that snowy texture. decided to go ahead and add a little bit of that to the cording as well as the tops of the light bulbs and on his scarf as well. And now I'm adding some of the enchanted shimmer to my snowflakes. So now I just have a couple of pieces of greenery that I cut off from a Christmas pick, and I'm trimming it down so that it fits more neatly underneath my snowman. It was just a little bit too bushy for the small space that I have there. And I will just apply those with hot glue. Then I add in a couple of these smaller pieces that are a lighter green on top of that. And then I decided to add on these mini pinecone and berry picks. I picked those up at Hobby Lobby and I cut them off because I just want to be able to hot glue those into that. I did have one that I cut too short, so all the pieces fell apart. So you want to be careful that you don't cut them too short. But then I just went ahead and hot glued those in there to add some color and some interest. I felt like it needed just a little bit more, so I added in some mini pine cones that I had purchased off of Amazon. Now, of course, the greenery and the pine cones and the pip berries all needed a little frost on them as well. So I'm just dry brushing with some white acrylic paint. And now with the enchanted shimmer, I am going to go over all our snowy parts, the tops of the light bulbs, the cord that hangs the light bulbs, the tree, the snowman's hat, the greenery underneath him. Everything needs just that very subtle sparkle of snow. And now for our final detail. I just cut another strip from that scarf that I had used for the snowman and made a simple shoestring bow and then hot glued it to the top of the wood round where the handle meets. I trimmed it up and then added the little fringes on the bottom just like the scarf has. And that completes this project. I had so much fun making this, and I think he turned out super cute. So let me know what you think, and I hope to see you in the next video. Well, that's it for this video. If you enjoy this type of content, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.